Jeremiah O'Brien was born in 1744. When he was 6 years of age, his family moved to Scarborough. While in Scarborough, they endured many hardships, including years of droughts and forest fires that burned their hay crops, barns, and houses. By the age of 10, Jeremiah's father had taught him to navigate at sea. He was a talented seaman at a very young age. In 1764, he had just turned 20 years old when he moved to Machias with his brother Gideon. The following spring of 1765, his father Morris and mother Mary Kane O'Brien moved to Machias with their remaining 3 sons. All O'Brien brothers were now united in Machias, where they built a wooden mill together. The Dublin, which was the name of the mill, was located on the south side of West River, just below the Big Falls. Jeremiah had a light complexion and blue eyes. He had light brown hair and a prominent nose. He was said to be large-hearted, kind-natured, and generous to a fault. It has been written that he was an athletic, gallant man, possessing good character, who easily commanded the confidence of those among whom he had lived. In 1769, Jeremiah and about 100 other able-bodied men formed the militia of Machias, the Machias Committee of Safety. The following year, Jeremiah owned 250 acres of land that stretched 1,650 feet below the falls. It was on his land in 1775 when about 60 men met at O'Brien Brook to decide if they should attempt to capture the HMS Margaretta and the British soldiers on board. These men knew they could hang for treason if they were not successful in the battle. When Benjamin Foster challenged the 60 men to jump the brook, the O'Brien brothers were among the first to jump. This was a symbolic gesture, like the historic event on the Rubicon River when Julius Caesar crossed over and started a war that he could not turn back from. Once the men jumped over the small brook, 31-year-old Jeremiah O'Brien shouted, "My boys, we can do it." The men appointed Jeremiah O'Brien to captain the ship named Unity. Then they quickly fastened rough lumber boards around the sides of the deck for added protection in case the British fired upon them. Jeremiah had a crew of 30 to 35 men who boarded carrying pick poles, axes, fowling guns, and pitchforks. The men with guns each had only 3 rounds of ammunition. Ammunition was scarce, and they did not have time to make more. The O'Brien boys had to force their elder father Morris to remain on shore. Morris wanted to fight, but the boys felt he was too old to go to battle. At about 10 a.m., the crew of the Unity drifted downriver. Jeremiah gave each man one last chance to change their minds about going to war with the British. As the Unity left the river and entered the bay, the crew rounded Salt Island and spotted the British Margaretta attempting to escape. The Unity sailed closer. Jeremiah shouted, "In America's name, I demand you surrender." 7 British soldiers leveled their Brown Bess muskets on John from about 35 feet away. When the smoke cleared, John stood unharmed. Realizing that his luck had likely been used up, he jumped overboard and swam towards the Unity, with his saber clenched in his teeth. The men on the Unity rescued John O'Brien and proceeded to ram the Margaretta a second time and successfully tied the ships together, and soon after captured the British. The detailed story of the battle can be told another time, but it should be noted that people on shore witnessed an elderly man rowing a small boat towards the battle. Morris O'Brien was not one to allow others to fight without him for a cause he so strongly believed in. A month later, in July of 1775, the British sent 2 ships from Nova Scotia to Machias to confirm rumors of the capture. They were ordered to capture the Irish Yankee named Jeremiah O'Brien if he had helped capture the Margaretta. Among the king's ships, named the Diligent and the Tamagouch, entered Machias Bay on July 12, 1775. They sent their captain and some of the crew to shore into Bucks Harbor. The British were captured by Stephen Smith and other local militiamen. British Captain Knight said that he and Captain Spry had no violent intentions. The British were marched to Machias, where a hearing was conducted. It was determined that the British had come to Machias with intentions of seeking revenge. The British were taken prisoner. Jeremiah O'Brien and Benjamin Foster were sent to headquarters in Cambridge to report the capture of the 3 ships. The British prisoners went with them. Some reports say they marched the entire way, and other reports that they sailed to Ponterborough and Falmouth, and they marched inland to Cambridge, avoiding detection. There's documentation of them spending a night in the Ponterborough courthouse, where they carved the image of the ship Polly into the wooden wall. That carving is still there today. Once they arrived in Cambridge, they reported the news to George Washington, who had just assumed command of the Continental Army. Jeremiah and Benjamin were then sent to Watertown, where the Provincial Congress was in session. It was there that Jeremiah was appointed captain in the Massachusetts Navy. He was ordered to use the captured ships to defend the coast and to capture more British ships. By fall, he had captured another British ship. O'Brien sailed up and down the coast from Nova Scotia to New York. O'Brien's ships, the Machias Liberty and the Diligent, became known as the Flying Squadron. It is written that Jeremiah's courageous victories inspired patriotic seamen from Maine to the Carolinas. Somewhere along the way, it appears that Jeremiah O'Brien and Benjamin Foster did not see eye to eye with each other. On July 5, 1776, the General Court of Massachusetts ruled that Captain Jeremiah O'Brien and Captain Lambert captured a ship and took it into Newport for 20 days without a court libel, and upon an examination of the court in the premises found that the goods on board had been much wasted. The court prayed that O'Brien and Lambert and the companies be prevented from receiving any money due to them from the colony until they made satisfaction for the waste and illegal capture and detention of the ship. About 45 days later, on August 30th, 1776, Benjamin Foster, who was the chairman of the Machias Committee of Safety, wrote a letter to the Massachusetts General Court. We, being appointed the Committee for Machias, we think our duty at all times makes known to your honors, having seen lately a copy of Jeremiah O'Brien's muster rolls for the Machias Liberty and the Diligent, sworn to him by the 12th of February last. We have examined the same and find he has much deceived your honors by putting down men that never did the duty, and after drawing their wages, refusing to pay them the same. We therefore beg that before your honors make any settlement with him, you would examine said rolls. In 1780, John and Joseph O'Brien built a privateer ship named the Hannibal. It had 24 cannons and a crew of 130 men. On her first voyage, John captured several prizes from the British. After that first voyage, Jeremiah commanded the ship. In December of 1780, the Hannibal was captured. Jeremiah and his entire crew were taken prisoner and placed on the prison ship, Jersey. The ship was known as a floating hell. The ship was full of diseases and filthy living conditions. After 6 months, his crew was set free. Due to Jeremiah's fame as an American pirate, he was sent to the Mill prison in England in July of 1781. He was hated and mistreated in prison. The British guards hated the Irish prisoners worse than the French and Spanish prisoners. The English and Irish had a long history of fighting. Jeremiah was determined to escape and return to America to finish the fight. Beards were not uncommon in the late 18th century. Often, the mentally ill were the men with beards. Jeremiah grew his beard and his hair. He withdrew from the other prisoners. He often sat by himself with a wool blanket over him. He intentionally acted like he had lost his mind. Somehow, he managed to befriend a French washwoman who worked in the prison. He gave the woman a coin he had smuggled into the prison. She agreed to bring him fresh clothes. She arranged for a man to be waiting in a boat to row him to safety. That night, he shaved his beard and cut his hair while nobody was watching. Once he was neatly shaven and his hair cut short, he hoped the guards would not recognize him as the Irish Yankee they so hated. As with most historical events, there are a few versions of how Jeremiah escaped from prison. One version is that he waited until the guards changed and pretended to be an attorney visiting a client and released by the new guards who did not recognize the cleanly shaven man in nice clothing. Another version of the escape is that he marched into the prison courtyard in the morning and hid under a platform. That night, when the prisoners were locked back up, he remained hidden. He escaped behind the guards when they went home that evening. It is also rumored that he had a drink with a British Marine between escaping and meeting the man in the rowboat. The man rowed him downriver, where he boarded a ship to France. No matter how he escaped, we know he had sailed from France to Scarborough and met his brother John, who was half owner of the ship Hannibal, which Jeremiah lost to the British. After the American Revolution, the British returned to Machias during the War of 1812. British defeated American forces in Hampton on September 3, 1814. On September 11, 1814, 5 British ships entered Machias Bay. They captured Fort O'Brien and burned the soldiers' barracks. Only 16 members of the Machias militia were at the Fort O'Brien when the British arrived without notice. They were under the command of Colonel Morse. 700 British regulars and about 200 riflemen invaded Machias. Many of them marched over Meserve Head and then upriver to Machias and camped there for 2 or 3 weeks. A young boy observed the troops coming over Meserve Head and ran to the village to alert the people. Colonel Jeremiah O'Brien put on his old naval uniform and hat and mounted his horse and rode through the streets begging men to volunteer. He was heard yelling, "If I can get 12 good men to go with me, I will go to Colonel Morse's relief." Not one man volunteered. It is said that he rode his horse across the bridge and up to the top of O'Brien Hill and began cursing loudly. The 70-year-old veteran was disgusted at the lack of patriotism. One man came walking upriver from duck hunting, and the British ordered him to surrender his fowling gun. The man refused and ran for the woods. The man tripped on a log just as the British fired upon him. He pretended to be hit. As the British doctor approached his location, he got up and ran away. Jeremiah returned home when he learned that the British were going door to door confiscating guns. He gathered his papers and arms and had a good friend hide his belongings outside of town. When the British knocked on his door, Jeremiah answered in his Revolutionary War uniform. The British laughed at the aged man and searched for his arms. They inspected his sword, which some say may have been a prize taken from Captain Moore on the Margaretta. The soldiers allowed O'Brien to keep his sword. O'Brien went to his cellar and returned with hard cider and cakes. The British officer raised his cup and said, "To the King's health." Jeremiah responded, "To the success of the American arms." He was not detained or scolded. It is likely that the British officer had a bit of admiration for the old man's patriotism. Thankfully, the British eventually surrendered this region. Eastport was the last place occupied by the British, where Fort Sullivan was surrendered in 1818. Had they not surrendered, the border of the United States would likely be much different. In 1811, U.S. President James Madison appointed Jeremiah O'Brien as the customs officer in Machias. Jeremiah O'Brien died in 1818 and is buried just below the falls. In more recent times, 5 U.S. naval ships and 1 locomotive train have been named after Jeremiah O'Brien. "100 years after his death, his descendants have revealed that the girl he raised named Lydia Whitney was actually his daughter. Lydia was born in 1804 and was born to Thankful Whitney, who lived from 1780 to 1864. Lydia married Aaron Simmons Sherman, who was the architect of the Ruggles House in Columbia Falls. Aaron and Lydia lived in the Burnham Tavern, and it is believed that Aaron built one of the fireplace mantels in the tavern because it matched the mantel in the Ruggles House. It is also believed that Aaron Sherman was the designer and builder of the Hill House on High Street, Machias. The legacy of Jeremiah O'Brien lives on in many ways as one of the first American patriots who helped create this great nation.